Hey everyone, thank you for coming to my first webinar, first presentation in a while as well. It's called Seizing the Means of Production, a Strategy for Accurate Task Estimation. So this is a very producery talk. Me being a producer is what I want to talk about, so thank you for coming. So a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to go into what estimates are, why they're important, and why it's not practical to expect developers to be able to do this accurately. This is no shade on developers, by the way. I'll explain myself later. Why collaboration work needs more time than people normally expect, and how to plan around that. And then we're going to go into the meat of the presentation on how to implement a data-driven solution. Then we're going to finish with some top tips to avoid some pitfalls that you may encounter during development. So before we start, I'm going to quickly give you a brief background on myself to give you like an idea of where I'm coming from. So if you've detected an accent, it's because originally I come from Greece, but I moved to the UK when I was 18 years old to study computer science. I know, funny given the issues I was having this morning, but I am actually good with computers most of the time. So yes, I studied computer science at King's College London, and I've been working in the games industry for 13 years now. I think it's 13 or 14, somewhere around that time frame. So I started off in QA like a lot of producers at TT Games. So I worked on various Lego projects, as is the deal with TT Games. And from then I moved on to Microsoft in Reading. So I did QA there during the Kinect era. So I worked on a bunch of Kinect titles, including Kinect Source Rivals. We mostly work with first-party studios. And then I went and did a master's in video game production and enterprise at Birmingham City University. And off the back of that, I was hired into Rockstar North as an animation producer, and I got the chance to work on such projects as Red Dead Redemption 2, GTA 5, you may have heard of it. And now I am working at Fundamentally Games as a producer across all of our projects, big and small. So let's dive into the presentation. So why it's not practical to expect developers to forecast things accurately. So what are estimates and why do we use them? So estimating tasks is a critical part of the development process because everyone needs to make sure that the project is completed on time and on budget. Unless you are the 0.0001% of developers that don't have to worry about this. But yeah, for the vast majority of developers, this is what we need to worry about. So we use estimates because most of the time, the answer to the question, how long will this task take to complete, is unknowable. Like it's not even hard to estimate. It's like we simply cannot know. And that is for a lot of reasons. So game development is complex in nature, and everything is constantly changing, the scope, the time, and the budget you have. And when you have a team of developers that set out to make a game, it's just impossible to know exactly every step they need to take to reach that goal of making that game. And I don't think anyone would argue with that. There's no way you know exactly every step and what issues you're going to encounter is just impossible. So say for example, even if you knew, we're going to just made a game, we're going to make that same game exactly, even if you hypothetically were to do that, the experience the second time around would be much different because first of all, some things might be streamlined because you already know how to do them, which is not exactly the same. But also, even if you had a different team, like different teams perform differently. And don't forget that humans are complex too. So that adds an extra layer to it. So, like I just said, 99% of the time, developers need to worry about deadlines. It's really, really important. And that is down to very practical things a lot of the time because they need to satisfy stakeholders. So these stakeholders might be publishers and might be higher management at the studio and what have you. And a lot of the time, these milestones are tied to money being released to fund further development. So it's really important that these deadlines are set, are realistic, so that the team can hit those deadlines and make sure that everyone gets paid and everyone is happy. So, as I'm sure as everyone knows, that modern games are only getting bigger, more complex, there's more people involved, so how can we go about setting deadlines? Well, what we can do, rather than have something like make a game, which is not very helpful, we break it down into tasks, and then we can use past data as a best first guess. And then I will go into more detail later as to how we'll do that. And then once we have those tasks broken down, how do we know how long they will take? And that's where we come into with estimates. So, why is estimating hard? So, developers can often be pretty bad at estimating their tasks, but that's not through fault of their own. A lot of the time in my career, I've asked the developer, like, hey, how long will this take to complete? Because it's my job to tell people, like, when will everything be done? That sort of question is what I get asked a lot. So if you ask a developer how long a task will take to complete, a lot of the time they'll be like, hey, how long is a piece of string? Or how long do I have? So for someone like me, that's not super useful. But let's go into why that is and try and wrap our head around that. So game development projects are constantly evolving. So game design by its nature changes along with development, because I don't think it's possible to design a game, like have a game design document and then go and implement that and then you ship the game like with no iteration, no changes. Like I really don't think that's possible. And that a lot of the time is because you need to implement and be able to play something to make sure to say like, hey, is this actually fun? And then, how can you know that until you've got a version of it implemented? So that's what brings iteration, and that's what brings extra complexity. And also because we are, while games are an art form, like there's also tech that goes along with it, and that tech can change throughout development. So it might be the tools that you're using internally, or it might be the engine you're using. Say you're working with Unreal or Unity and there's an update that gets pushed out, that might have repercussions on your game. Or even you're making a game for Xbox or PlayStation, and then there's an update to the SDK for the devs, or there's a new platform even that gets introduced and you have to support. So there's all those different things that can trip you up along development that you can't really plan for in advance. And also, like we touched upon previously, game development is complex by nature, and that is down to the fact that most teams will be cross-collaborative. Very few teams are siloed. So that means there's dependencies. Those teams can have different priorities. So all of that needs aligning and communication, and that brings in complexity. So also the question is, how can you estimate something that you don't fully understand before you actually go in and start doing it, and something that you might have never done before, or it might also be the case that no one has ever tried to do before, depending on the ambition of your team and your project. Also, another thing that can bring complexity is people and teams use different rules as to what an estimate should be. So some people might include weekends in the time frames, some people might not. Some people might include buffer time or contingency time. Some might not, or they might use a different percentage of that. Like it might all be up to people's interpretation. And some people might be a bit too optimistic or an idealistic when their estimates, and say like, okay, this task will take me 2 days because I need to make it in 2 days because I have other stuff to do and stuff like that. So those differences in the interpretation of what an estimate is can bring in complexity. And also, let's not forget that a team is comprised of human beings, and we are working with humans at the end of the day, so and not robots most of the time. So it's impossible to know, someone might, a key person in your team might fall ill, they might need time off, they might be burnt out, all those things that you never know. And it's also very likely that I don't know if I should say very likely or a given that there will be some miscommunication at some point. So you might tell them one thing, they understand another, they go off and implement something, and you're like, no, actually, this is not what I wanted at all. And that leads to back and forth, that leads to time lost, and then, how do you quantify that? So before you go in to and implement any kind of data-driven solution that we're going to outline later, it's very important to have everyone on the team understand exactly what we mean when we say estimate. So that needs to be decided upon and clearly communicated to the entire team. And then we need to have processes in place, usually with production enforcing them, to ensure that this understanding is preserved throughout the course of the project, because people might forget, there might be new people joining, there's all sorts of things. So we need to have a process in place to make sure this doesn't get forgotten about. For me, what I usually end up doing is, for me, an estimate is a best guess of how long a task should take, with a view to communicating through that the level of fidelity we expect at that point in the project. So I will go into that a bit later, but just as a way of communicating, not so much the time, but the time we expect it to take. But I have an example, so I'll just let the example speak for itself. And then, but whatever, that is my definition. Each team should come together at the start of the project, ideally, unless you are mid-project and you want to implement this solution, which is also possible. But you need to find exactly what that definition is and stick to it, and make sure everyone knows what it is. So we have an example scenario to illustrate what I was just trying to say. So say you need, you're a developer and you need a quick health bar a graphic so you can test out a mechanic or like a health potion or something, right? And you give an artist 2 days to create this HP bar. What will most likely happen is the artist will take at least 2 full days to create the most elaborate, intricate HP bar you've ever seen. They might even take longer than that. Now, the outcome of that is, does it fulfill the requirement? Did they do what you asked of them? Yes. Would you have been happy with something that took a fraction of the time to create? Most likely, at that stage in development. Could the amount of time required be communicated with a proper estimate? Definitely. So let's imagine that instead of 2 days, you're giving them 2 hours and you say hey, just give me something this afternoon. Just put something together and give me something quick and dirty bar that's, it would have just suited you just fine at the time. You don't need anything super intricate and elaborate. The repercussions of that would be that you get your health bar sooner. You don't have to wait 2 full days. You can just wait a couple of hours and then have what you asked for. Then the artist can move on to their other tasks and everyone wins. Then that also leads to less time wasted. If you find out that, for example, actually we don't want a health bar, we want multiple smaller health bars, or I don't know, something like that. So what they can do is they continue working. That wastes less time if you need to scrap the whole thing, for example. And then once they give you what you need, and if fits your criteria at the time, they can then continue working on it in parallel. They can make it pretty. They can do whatever they want on it. But you are not blocked. They're not being a bottleneck for your workflow. So everyone wins, basically. I also want to touch upon what an estimate is not. It's not a deadline. It shouldn't be a deadline. And it is okay and expected for a task to take longer than the original estimate, because an estimate is literally our best guess, right? And it's never going to be an accurate prediction. So it will almost never be 100% accurate. And if you are, well, kudos to you, but it's very, very unlikely. So we need to keep that at the back of our minds. However, having said that, if we have better source data plus time, we will be able to have better accuracy in our task estimation. And we'll go over that in a little bit. So let's move on to the next point of that I wanted to cover today. So collaboration work and why it needs more time than most people expect and how to plan around that. So let's say we've broken down our list of tasks that we need to create this game, this hypothetical game we're making. So you need to identify the dependencies between them. For example, like a lot of the time, you might not be able to begin coding and implementing something until you have some semblance of an art asset, right? So what you need to do is you need to make sure that these dependencies are known and that the workflows of each team that the dependencies concern are working with the view, like they're not blocking each other basically. So like there's no, can the coding team do something else while the art assets are being created? And when those become available, they can have the time planned to go in and implement those at a really high level, but still like it's important to know that sort of thing. And yeah, that's what I just said. So basically you understand the order, that there is an order to things, and depending on how you want to tackle production in general for your project and the size of your project and stuff, you want to understand that order and prevent further delays so people are not blocking each other, like I just said. It's also really important to understand if you are in one of those teams that has dependencies, which is most teams in game development. It's really important to have a good understanding of the other team's pipelines. Like you don't have to know the ins and outs of it, but like where you need to know at what stage of the other team's pipeline the dependency occurs. Like at what stage in their pipeline does your part come in? What level of fidelity you expect? So like it's not good if you're waiting for like just a placeholder and they give you a final asset and you're waiting for ages for like a super amazing final asset and you're like, what the hell? So and also you need to know these things and also make sure to communicate that to everyone so you can manage their expectations. It's also a very good opportunity to streamline and align your processes. So like you might find that like, oh, actually we don't need to wait until that part of your pipeline. We will be more than happy with this bit further ahead, earlier still, so we can hook something up or something. I don't want to go into specific examples, but it can happen. So yeah, like I just said, a classic example, our team and rigging team. The rigging team might need something really simple to make a basic rig, to hook up a basic rig to. It's no good waiting for a final character before they can start rigging, like they can tinker with it further along, but down the line, but to begin with, they might just need something really, really simple. So it's important to identify those things. So it's also important to keep in mind that the bigger the team, the more people involved, the more coordination time is needed. So it's important to keep the points of contact minimal and consistent. Usually production tends to be that point of contact. Production or a team lead of sorts. Again, it depends on the team structure. And we just need to make sure that the paths of communication are streamlined. And and a thing to point out is that different teams and the size of the team and the project and the studio, like you may or may not use the same rules for your estimates, which can be also confusing because 2 days for your team might be 2 calendar days, or for the other team it might be 2 work days, which is vastly different and in terms of calculating things. So it's important to identify those things. In cases where there's a mismatch into how the two teams do production, it's important to, if you have the opportunity to, it's good to look at past data and try and extrapolate estimates from that. Like see, like if you were working on a smaller project before or the previous milestone or something, you can look at that and be like, hey, okay, how did we do it then? and then try and see like, okay, this is how long it took. Like regardless of what the raw data might say, you might be able to put your system around that and make the data, like mold the data to what you want, you know. So it might be the case there is no past data that you can use, or it might be really hard to extract the bits that you need. So a good practice, a very common practice, is to add some contingency time until you have the data-driven process we're going to talk about set up, and you can have your own projections and estimates. A good rule of thumb is to add like a 10 to 25% on top of the estimate you're given. But then you would also need to run that past a lead developer usually to make sure that it sounds about right. You can't just slap numbers on things, you know, you need to run it past someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So me as a lowly producer, you know, I can't just, I mean I could, but I don't want to take liberties, you know, I need to ask someone who knows what the work actually entails. Yes, also I need to stress that cross-team communication is super, super, super important in catching any differences in understanding as early as possible and avoiding any time lost. So, like I said, with the direct lines of communication between production or team leads, or both, if we have those, then we can make sure that issues are raised. There's progress like say we're all working towards a particular level at a given time, right? So we want to make sure that we are all progressing towards the common goals at the same time. And, you know, it's not like one team is working on one thing and another one is worrying about another, you know, because we need to kind of be aligned, right? And any questions can be answered. We just need to make sure that people know who to go to, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And this communication can be something as like a regularly scheduled meeting, a weekly status report, like a written report, a combination of the two, a dashboard, all sorts of things, all of the above. So now let's get into it. So how to implement a data-driven solution. So there's two stages to this. Basically what we're trying, the goal of this is we've established that it's really hard for humans to be able to predict accurately how long a task will take. So what we need to do, the goal here is to remove the human factor as much as possible and try and get the data to tell us what to expect. So the first stage of this is gathering past data where possible and drawing conclusions from that. And then stage 2 is setting up a data a certain way and then tracking certain aspects of it regularly, and then extrapolating from that and coming up with projections. So for stage 1, what we need to do is we need to gather data that we might have from a past project, a past milestone, anything we can get our hands on, basically. And that can be at team level, at individual developer level. It might be the type of task level if we have a clearly set out pipeline that we're working through. So what we need to gather is, okay, when did the task start? So that might be, depending on how your tasks are set up, it might, and your database is set up, it might be the day the task was created. It might be the day the task was assigned to someone. It might be the day they marked it as, I have started working on this now, or they left a comment or something. Anything where you can be like, okay, this is the day when they started, like actively started working on this task. And then we also need to capture when exactly it finished. So it might be that within a task you include stuff like reviews from a lead or peer reviews or anything, or it might not be marked as complete until it's in the build. But what we care about is like, okay, when did the developer finish working on it? When did they say like, okay, my part here is done? When did that happen? And then we need to compare the previous estimates we had to the actual time we just calculated, and try and draw any conclusions we can from that. So it might be that the actual time spent by developers was across the board was 20% over the estimates that we had. So from that we can learn that, okay, our estimates were too low, so we need to allow for more time. Or it might be that, oh, actually we don't need them to be taking this long, and then they were getting blocked because of this issue or something, like, and oh, how do we fix that issue that they were consistently hitting? Or it might be like, oh, we kept having to wait for this other team. But it's really useful to get that data and then make informed decisions based on that. So I can't stress this enough. The more data you can get your hands on, the better. It's extremely powerful to have this sort of data. So yeah, this is very like data analysis that you have to do. So this is the step where you can assess, okay, what do we actually have to play with, and how you can use that data to draw conclusions. Like, do you have estimates? Do you have actual time? Do you have progress? Like, you need to, it really depends on how your database is set up. And yeah, just see what you have and think creatively as to how to use that. So it might be that you're missing some key data points that you need. So at that point you might be able to say you're using a bespoke database, like bigger studios tend to do that, to use their own bespoke tools. So it might be that, hey, you can talk to the database team and be like, hey, can I get this sort of data exposed to me so I can do some analysis or something. It might be that, or it might be that you can't do that, and you have to use a different data field as something that's not, if it's not currently used, you might be able to like, okay, can we start using this, or can we use this differently to get you what you need, basically. But that's at that time, like when you're looking at what you have, you need to think about like, okay, how can I use this to the best of my ability? So yeah, so say you've done all this and you've gotten a rough idea of like, this is a rough, based on past data, this is how long I think this sort of thing will take. And that gets you some of the way there, but you need to communicate the caveats that like, hey, this is not super accurate. This will keep changing as we become more accurate as we go along. So this is where stage 2 comes in. So you're looking at your current data, right? The current active things people are working on. So again, what you need to capture from this is how many days, like when did the work start? And how many days has it been since that? So like, again, similarly, when did someone actively start working on this? Like when did they say, I have started working on this today? And then you also need to capture what is the current progress percentage. That might be a field you can extract from the database. It might be a comment they leave on there every day. It can be anything. But it's really important to make sure that is accurate day on day. It can go back, it can go backwards, because like sometimes they're like, oh, actually I'm not as far along as I thought I was. Like, oh, I had a review with my lead and I've gone back. Regardless what it is, like it doesn't have to constantly keep going up, although that is ideal. It just needs to be accurate. Like, okay, where are you at with this? And then from that we can calculate how much more time is needed to complete the task at this current rate of progress. So, and from that, at the end of that, we get a date, and you can pin that date against a timeline and be like, okay, is that within an acceptable time frame, or is it coming in past the deadline where we need it? And then you can flag that and be like, okay, what do we do? Like you just problem solve at that point, but at least it gives you a really clear idea of like where you're at. So let's go into it. So to recap, the problem is people can't estimate. So how long is a piece of string, being the conversation we're having earlier. So the solution is to let the data tell you, or what I like to call look into the past to predict the future. So I also like to call this looking into my crystal ball. So let's go through an example to illustrate this better. So say you have a task, a developer has been working on a task for 2 days, and when you ask them how far along they are, they say it's about 25% done. How long will this take to complete? So we'll go back to some elementary school maths. So it took 2 days to be 25% done. How long will it take to be 100% done? So we cross multiply, and then we solve for x. So 2 times 100, x times 25, divide those two, solve for x, and you come up with 8 days. So the new estimate for this task is 8 days minus the 2 that have elapsed. 6 days from today is when this task should be done, given the current rate. Next day you go in and update it again and see like, okay, has it gone up? Is that still on track? Has that changed? And you can see like day in, day out, like the more data you have, the more accurate it gets. So yeah, it's 6 days remaining from today, or the original start date plus 8 days. And then you need to adjust that for weekends, because it might be that you started this, I'm not good at mental arithmetic, but you can be like, the start date was a Friday, and it says that we've come up with a total for this task being 8 days. That will bring you to like a Saturday, right? So most people don't work on a Saturday, and they shouldn't. So we should adjust that to be, okay, we'll say it's complete on the Monday. It will be complete on the Monday. Like we round up to allow for weekends. And that gives us a rough idea, like early on, of how long it will take based on at this stage. Like remember, we're only 2 days in, but we can already say like with a good amount of confidence it will take another X amount of days. So like, oh no, it won't be done tomorrow, like you ask. Like if someone asks you like, hey, will this be done tomorrow, like you can accurately tell them like, no, it will be next week, and then they can make their own decisions. So how we use this is we do this to keep track of the ongoing progress, and we can adjust as needed. So it might be that we need to catch things falling behind early, and we can mitigate the effects of that. So it might be like I just mentioned, we have stakeholders asking us like, hey, will this be done we want to have a play session on Friday. Will this feature be done by then? And you can confidently say yes or no to that, rather than be like, I don't know. It's always good to like, and people don't usually argue with data, which is why I really like this method. It might be that the task is falling behind because the developer has fallen ill and no one is actually working on this, so it has stalled. So okay, if we need this by a certain date, we might think about reassigning the task. Or it might be that the task is actually bigger than we originally thought, and we might want a more basic implementation of it for now to quickly get this in the build, because we're in a rush to create a build for an event or something, you know, like there's all these discussions that can stem from this sort of data. So it's really powerful. And also, like I said earlier, it might be that we keep finding that the original estimates we had were consistently off. So what we can do that once we get enough data to say like, hey, this is really consistent now, like we are always off by 20%, we can go back and be like, okay, from now on we'll add an extra 20% on the original estimate, so that it's people don't like to go over estimates, is what I found in my career. So like it's good to kind of give them something that's realistic. So yeah, we can just once we get that, we can extrapolate that information. We can be like, okay, let's just change that going forward. It also might be the case that we find info, like depending on how you set this up, it might be that a certain team member often struggles to complete their tasks within the given estimate. So we can then dig into why that might be. It might be that their workflow is not as streamlined as it could be, or they don't understand, they didn't know they could use a certain tool to help them along, or all sorts of things. So we can flag those things and put measures in place to support them better. Quickly, we'll finish with some tips to avoid some pitfalls here. So you need to include all time lapsed since the task started. So if it started on a Wednesday and it finished, if a developer said they started working on it on a Wednesday and they finished working on it the Monday, you include that weekend. So the overall time, like we include the weekend on that. Or they went off for a bit, or they spent some time waiting for a review while the task was still like active. We need to include all time, so it needs to be calendar days that we're working with, because that's what, in my experience at least, gives you the most accurate representation of how long things take. The data is only as good as you make it, so we need developers, every team member, to update the progress as they go along. So you might have heard producers joke about getting people to update the JIRAs, which is a constant producer struggle, but that might be how to get people to do that. That might be a discussion for another time. But it's really important that people do that, and that's why producers always harp on about it. You also need to update the projected estimates often, ideally daily, but it might be that depending on the size of the project, depending on the point in game development you're in, you might need to do it twice daily. That might be overkill. You might need to do it, but it's good to do it daily, just to keep at the same time. Every day at the same time, just have take a snapshot of that, and then you can get a really good idea of what is going on with your team. Also, I want to stress that you never want to change the original estimate, because if you overwrite that original value that you put in there, you can't compare it with the actuals, and then you can't track any lessons learned. Like I said earlier, if you compare those two, you might find that you're consistently off, or you might be that, oh, actually this one asset took 3 times as long as everything else. Why was that? And then you can dig into that and ask the people involved and be like, okay, well, this took longer because this, that, and the other thing. And then you can have a post-mortem discussion and be like, okay, how can we mitigate that going forward? And it just, if you erase that value, you lose out on all that really good information. So it's really important not to do it. So it might be that you need different fields to track all this, but again, it really depends how your data is set up. And also you need to track as much data as you can get your hands on. Even if it's not something that someone has asked you directly, it's good as a producer to track everything that you can, and you never know when someone might ask you something, and it's good to have that on hand, and then you can be like, oh, actually I already have this. You don't have to make bespoke things. And yeah, that's it. I hope that was helpful for you, and yeah, I'm ready for any questions you might have. Let me see. Right. Okay, so I'm gonna take it from the top. So, got some questions here. So, how big should each chunk of the task be? Right. So, each chunk of it. How long should each task be? I'd like to keep it as. It really depends on your project and your team, but I think it's important to. It's hard to say without going into specifics, but I like to keep it as small as possible, without it being too small. There's a sweet spot. So it's no good having something like, oh, that will take me 3 months to complete, because it's 3 months is a huge amount of time. So what will you do? If you can tell me there need to be distinct steps, so manageable steps, so a day, a half day, an hour, a couple of days might be okay. But if you can get it down to each step being around a day, then that is really good. But it really depends what you're doing, and how you. It really depends how your team works. so I can't really answer that for you, but I would say small enough to be a known entity, but not too small that people are having to spend half their day managing their tasks, you know? So there is a sweet spot to be answered there, to be found there. But you can narrow that in. You can nail that down. So another question. The answer to Parkinson's law is to give an option for a just good enough, no matter how slow it is, and to refine it when it's absolutely positively final thing. I think that's kind of how game dev tends to work. I'm not entirely sure what Parkinson's law is, I'm not gonna lie. But how it tends to work is you start off with a really rough implementation, and then you iterate on that, and everything slowly gets better together. And in every project I've been involved in, at least, everything is a mess for the longest time, and then everything somehow comes together and a game congeals at the very, very end. So yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question there. I'm not sure about Parkinson's law, but I hope that was helpful. Okay, so next question. What to do when there are way too many things that are ready for development, as in no dependencies is the same priority? Pick anything, or have a higher structure like Epic in Agile that will be prioritized between other epics? That's a good question. It depends on, like, I mean, same priority. I don't know, like there's got to be a priority that might not be visible to the team itself, but it might be to someone with a higher view of the project. So it might be that everyone should be working towards a vertical slice, for example, or a demo or something like that, or we want to make sure that we would implement the game in chronological order of how a player will experience it. So typically the first part of the game is the most polished, right? Because that's the vast majority of people that play the game will only see that first hour or so. So that you need to make sure that that is that might be more priority than others, you know. Or it might be that like the for example, like I worked with an animation team for a long time, so for us, like a cutscene is a cutscene, right? You know, you don't necessarily have a priority for it, but it might be the case that, like, oh, we really want to make sure that this narrative arc is we want to work on it at this stage and make sure that we have nailed that down, right? So you might need to align all of your teams to make sure that, like, okay, let's work on these 5 cutscenes that are at this stage in the game and make sure that these are really polished. So you would prioritize those over everything else. Or it might be that, oh, we want this type of content to be prioritized over everything else because we think it's more valuable, or we want to make sure that everyone is working on it in tandem, or we've never done this sort of thing before, so we prioritize that because it's harder. There's all sorts of things that come, like there has to be a priority. It might not, when you're in the weeds with it, you might not be able to see it, but someone might have a bird's eye view of everything. They might be able to identify those better. Yeah, so what about greenfield projects when there are way too many things to do? What should be done here, how to proceed? I'm not sure what a greenfield project is. If you could define that for me, that would be great. Let's move on to the next one. What do you think about Tres Amigos meeting, where the dev, producer, and QA brainstorm the details before throwing an estimation instead of producer only, or just a planning poker between devs? Yeah, absolutely. Like I want to make sure that this is not something that a producer would do by themselves. Like they can do the data gathering, but the final say will never be to the producer. For me, the role of production is to help leads, directors make informed decisions. So like production can get you like this method I just described can get you a lot of the way there, or most of the way there, but you still need someone to step in at the end and be like, okay, yes, this sounds about right, you know. So you still need that check at the end. And yeah, planning poker is great if you can get people to. It's good to have those discussions of like, oh, I think this will take half a day, and I think this will take 3 days, and like have that conversation and hash it out and be like, okay, why do you think this? Why do you think this? Like, and really make sure that everyone is on the same page as to what we mean. Let's see. When all this data starts being relevant on a 6 to 10 people, it starts being valuable, but I haven't seen much impact in tiny teams. I think it's. I imagine it's team size agnostic, because data is data, right? So, I mean, communication is much easier between smaller teams, right? But the numbers don't lie. So if you set everything up correctly and accurately, and people are actively tracking their progress and stuff, like it's the same if you have 3 people or 300. Like it doesn't really make a huge difference. So, character controller, should I tackle whole controller or break into parts? It depends how you define that in your team. Like how do you control your character? What can the character do? Like, and what kind of actions do they have? Like, I would break that down per actions. Like, a move forward, move backward, strafe, shoot, jump. Like I would break that down into. Like, you might have like a whole thing of like a bigger task of like, hey, the character needs to move. I need to be able to control the character, right? But then what does that entail? Like, I would have subtasks within that and then estimate accordingly. Oh, you explained Parkinson's law. So work expands as to fill the time available for its completion. Yes, exactly. That was saying, like, especially in our teams, that tends to happen quite a lot. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's definitely. I've learned something today. Thank you. So yeah, in my experience, that is definitely something that happens. Like it's only happened to me maybe once in my career, where I had someone when I was at university. I'll never forget. This artist was like, "Oh, this task will take me 2 weeks to do. It's not gonna make the sprint. Like, we have to tell the stakeholders." And I was like frantically trying to figure out how to do it, like how to communicate that to our stakeholders, are like, hey, we're not gonna get this thing that you really wanted. And by the time like it took me to write up like into my presentation like how we're gonna say this, the artist turns around to me and says like, oh, hey, I've done it. Like, it actually took them 2 hours rather than the 2 weeks. So it can happen, but it's really rare most of the time. Greenfield project. Okay, so a new project. So what was that question? Where there are way too many things to do. Yeah, I would start with obviously there's projects game projects are most of the time huge, so I would start with what I described earlier. So either you want a vertical slice to be able to pitch to publishers for money, or you want to make a demo to get your game out and get some reactions on, like, how people feel about it early on. Or you might want to, if it's a narrative game, you might want to do it in chronological order, or it really depends on the project, but there's always some priority, some hierarchy that you can come up with. I'm pretty confident saying that. Again, it might not be super clear to the people within the development team, but someone or a small team of people might have a bird's eye view of everything, so they can guide you in that a bit better, I think. I see some people typing, so there's more questions. Please keep them coming. I'm happy to answer questions for a bit more. But yeah, if you don't get to it, like I said earlier, we will have another session on Friday, I believe. I need to double check, where you can just ask me questions on Discord, or just at any time, just reach out to me. My email is on screen here. You can reach out to me, and this is my Twitter. Please feel free to reach out at any point. I'm happy to help out. Yes, no, I would definitely. I'm happy you found this useful, and if I couldn't appreciate how important production is in game development, I think the other producers in game development would kick me out of the club. So, yeah, no, I'm glad you found this useful. Okay, so is it worth it to dip into good old corporate Scrum and Agile methodologies, or is not that well applied to game dev? Yes, so good question, a big question. I think that no one actually does Scrum or Agile by the book. No one does this. Everyone is like, and no one does waterfall either. So it's always a mix of different methodologies. It's good, I think, for producers especially to have an understanding of what it means, like what is the philosophy behind Scrum, like what were they trying to accomplish, and how do you make that work. And you know, Scrum is one that a lot of people try to emulate, and also Kanban. There's all sorts of different production methodologies. I wouldn't say like be really prescriptive with them. It's good to know what ideas I bring to the table, and then what I like to do is mix and match from those. Like educate yourself in what's out there, and then try and mix and match like from them to form a custom solution for your particular circumstances. So yeah, like it might be different teams respond differently to different methodologies, or for the project at large it might be something else that you want to put into place. Like it really just depends on what you're setting out to achieve and how your team works. But I would say yeah, like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of this stuff has been tried and tested, even within game development. Like a lot of it works really well. But yeah, like when you're setting out to apply a new workflow, it might be an upward battle, but like there's ways around that. And again, that might be a discussion for another time on how to do that, because yeah, no one likes change, so it's hard. If you follow Scrum in spirit, you use whatever works for the team. Maybe that might be something that works for you. You don't have to do Scrum. Like, there's no points for being like, oh, we are the most agile team in the world. Like, there's no points for that. At the end of the day, it's like whatever works for your team and for the project, and for, you know, does it serve the game at the end of the day is what you need to be asking about. Like, is this helping my developers reach their goals? Is what you need to be asking. And don't get so caught up on like, oh, are we using the best methodology? Like, oh, are we using the cool thing that everyone's trying out? Like, there might be some value to it. Like, okay, it might be popular for a reason, but it's good to, yeah, keep it in mind. Like, you know, it has to work for the game at the end of the day. Kanban board with no priorities, at least it helps know what to do next. Yeah, sure. Like if you have a list that people like, okay, if there are truly no real priorities and you're happy with whatever, as long as people know like, okay, this is ready for you to work on, I see nothing wrong with that. Like, yeah, just as long as people know that there's still work coming, that, you know, and they're not blocked off sitting there doing nothing, you know. As long as you keep the work going, then I see nothing wrong with that. Cool. All right. No, I'm glad I answered all your questions. I hope I answered all of your questions. We still got a couple of minutes if there's any more questions from anyone else. If not, like I said, you can reach me on my email. You can reach me on Twitter if that's your sort of thing. And yeah, and also we'll have a Q&A session later in the week, so keep your eyes peeled on the Discord for that.